Now we can move to the second presentation of this session. Our second speaker is Sebastian Fronzak, who will be talking about his work on modeling the duration of retail bank deposit. Sebastian is a supervisor at the European Central Bank. Sebastian, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Good morning, and I would like to thank the organizers for accepting our paper, and I'm looking forward for the discussion with the discussant and also to the comments from the audience. The work is joint work from me, Sebastian Frączak, together with my colleagues Peter Hoffman and Federico Pierobon, all of us working at the European Central Bank, and of course the standard disclaimer applies. The results of the paper are based on the draft version of the paper. The reason is that we had the results nearly ready, and then there was a shift in the interest rate environment, which gave us a unique opportunity to test our model also in an increasing interest rate environment. Nevertheless, I'm very happy to share this preliminary results with you. So let's start with what we did and why we did it. We were interested in exploring the behavior of depositors in connection to the interest rate movements. In particular, we focused on sight deposits because those can be withdrawn at any time, but we know from practice that they exhibit a significant degree of stability, which means that they need to be modeled for the bank to know how long the deposits are going to stay with them and how the value of the deposits is going to change together with the change in the market interest rate. And our model allows us to estimate exactly this, the level of modified duration, but also, as we will see, it allows to see how much depositors are influenced by the changes in the market and the deposit interest rates. We show two cutoff points, one 2018 and one 2023, which lets us discover these differences between different interest rate scenarios. The data that we used are end-of-month bank solo deposit volumes and the corresponding interest rates from the IPSI and EMIR databases. Those are not publicly available. In the data, there are some data limitations, especially we have an issue with the length of the time series. For the bank data, the earliest data points are from July 2007. So we filtered the banks entering our sample to ensure that there is a minimum length of the data for each bank of 5 years, which is 60 months, and the materiality threshold of at least 1 billion euros of deposits in each bank entering the sample, and the deposit liabilities needs to constitute at least 5% of the total liabilities. Overall, we end with 130 banks entering the sample for sight deposits. I should also, sorry, do you see my screen? Okay, I should also, I'm sorry, no. I had some, okay, you should start seeing it soon. Okay.
Maybe we can share the slides if you want.
I will be back with you in a second. For whatever reason, my docking station just stopped working for a second. Okay, good. Sorry for that. Docking station is back on.
Yeah, nice work.
So as I said, we filtered the banks to ensure some minimum quality of banks and of data entering our sample, and we end up with 130 banks. Now let's move to the model setup. How did we model the input for what we eventually will get, what we eventually need for the deposit stability parameters? We start with the, oh, sorry, you see my wrong screen. Now, you see, we start with the market interest rate, which we assume to be an autoregressive model infers differences. We decided for the specification because it captures nicely the monetary policy cycles. When the interest rates go up, they generally tend to go up for quite some time, and then when they go down, they tend to go down for quite some time. While this model is obviously very simplistic, we tried also different approaches used in literature. So, for example, Cox-Ingersoll-Ross model, which, however, doesn't allow negative interest rate, what was prohibitive in the interest rate environment that we had. Or a Vasicek model, however, this one, when we estimate it on the past data, boiled down to just simple random walk. Therefore, we decided for this for the model that we show here. From the market interest rate is an input for the deposit interest rate equation. In the existing literature, we saw that the deposit interest rates are often modeled as a linear relation to market interest rate. However, this approach assumes that there is an immediate transmission from the market interest rate to the deposit interest rate. We know, however, that this is not the case and that the adjustment is more sluggish. Therefore, we decided to use an error correction model, which allows for the long-term equilibrium between the market and the deposit interest rate, but the path to this equilibrium is only granular adjustment. Then we move to the deposit volume, which uses as input the deposit interest rate and the market interest rate. The underlying idea is in the deposit volume equation is that depositors face a choice between putting money in the deposit at the interest rate I, the deposit interest rate, or investing it at the market at the market interest rate R. So this is the opportunity cost for the depositors. And the assumption is that the higher the differences, the more incentivized the depositors are to either accumulate money on the deposit or to shift their funds to the market. We also notice, we also take into account in our research that depositors are influenced by the credit worthiness of the banks. However, we know that this relation is not linear, but depositors start caring about the credit worthiness only after a specific threshold of riskiness is crossed. Therefore, we use a dummy variable which takes value of 1 whenever the CDS, the country CDS are above 200 basis points, and 0 otherwise. We decided to use the country CDSs due to the limited coverage of bank level data regarding the CDSs. So the sovereign risk is the proxy for the bank risk in our research. We, however, did some robustness checks using bank CDSs for those banks for which we could find it, and the results were comparable to using the country CDS. Then we estimate the model, we estimate all the equations on the past data, and then we simulate the whole model 1,000 times, which creates us with 1,000 different paths for market interest rate, deposit interest rate, and the deposit volumes. So this is how what we get from the simulations: have the market rates, deposit interest rates, and deposit volumes with some distribution of potential future paths. As I said, we have a cutoff point in 2018 and in 2023, so we can then compare the results on these two cutoff points. Now let's look at the last piece of our model before I start showing you the results, which is how we calculated the duration. So for each triplet, so the market interest rate, the deposit interest rate, and the deposit volume, we can calculate the net present value using the approach developing Yarrow van Deventer model, the Yarrow van Deventer paper. They show in their paper that the net present value of the deposits over a specific time tau can be calculated as the sum of the difference between the market interest rate and the deposit interest rate multiplied by the deposit volume, and then discounted the regular discount factor. The how parameter is extremely relevant input for the model, and I will focus on this in the chart to come. For now, I just mentioned that we used tau equal to 10 years, so 120 months in our monthly simulations. We also calculate the expected percentage gain or loss on the deposit liability, which is the net present value of the deposits divided by the initial value of those deposits. We wanting to understand how how the value of the deposit changes for the bank in response to the market interest rate changes, we calculate the modified duration. For this, we use the regular modified duration bond pricing formula, which shows us by how many percent the value of the deposit liability changes based on the 1 percentage point change in the underlying market rate. What I would like to highlight is what is going to be relevant for the further charts is that we do not have one duration per bank, because we have 1,000 paths, we have 1,000 present values for each of the banks, so we have a full distribution of durations for each of the banks.
Sebastian, just to say there are 5 minutes left. So.
Yes, I know. And right now I'm moving to the results. So in the left-hand side chart, we see we present the long-term pass-through rate. We notice that it's very heterogeneous among the banks with the average of 28%. The right-hand chart is very important for us, and it shows one of the main points that we wanted to see, meaning the impact of the interest rate changes on the depositor behavior. And we clearly see here that when the opportunity cost, so the difference between the market rate and the deposit interest rate, increases, the depositors do react. So we see that a 100% increase in the difference between the deposit and the market interest rates means a change in the deposit volume growth of 0.4% per month, which sums up to 5% per year, which is a economically relevant value. We also notice that the model parameters are relatively stable between 2018 and 2023. So the results that I'm going to discuss further are not due to the model changes, but due to the underlying macroeconomic conditions changes. Here you see that the bank creditworthiness indeed do affect the customer's behavior. This is the coefficient of the deposit volume growth, the CDS coefficient in the deposit volume growth equation. And we see that for the first quartile of the banks, the cutoff point is 0.5% per month, meaning that if the depositors notice that the banks are less creditworthiness, have lower creditworthiness, they start to deposit money much slower in the specific bank. The right-hand chart I will skip due to the time constraints and move straight to the key result, to one of the key results from our paper, which is the modified duration. What you see here is the density of the median bank duration. What I mean here is that for each of the banks, as I said, we have 1,000 different durations, and for each of the banks, we take the median duration, and here we depict the density of those median durations for 2018 and for 2023. The median duration decreased from, on average, 14.4 in 2018 to 2.5 years in 2023. What is interesting to see here is that the median modified duration in 2018 was longer than our simulation horizon. Our simulation horizon was 10 years and the duration was 14.4. The reason for this was that in the low interest rate environment, when the market interest rate was below zero, was below the deposit interest rate, depositors had no incentive to withdraw funds. They had an incentive to only accumulate funds, and the volumes of the deposits in the model increase and increase, magnifying the effect of the value effect of the changes in the underlying market interest rate. This effect is not visible in 2023 since the interest rate is the market interest rate is much higher than the deposit interest rate. We are also interested to see whether our model could have foreseen or foresaw this massive shortening in the duration we observed in 2023. And indeed, when we take the 5th percentile of the distribution of the bank duration in 2018, we see that the model did indeed forecast this massive shortening in the duration. And not surprisingly, this 5th percentile of the durations for each of the bank are associated with strongly increasing market interest rates. So what are the main takeaways from our paper? First of all, we show that the deposit duration is time dependent, and it lengthens in the decreasing and low interest rate environment and shortens in an increasing interest rate environment. And this is due to the changes in the customer behavior in relation to the market and the deposit interest rate. This cyclical behavior can be a source of it can be a source of vulnerability if it is not managed properly. We also showed that with the CDS coefficient that I presented to you, that depositors do react to the creditworthiness of the institutions, and therefore managing the interest rate risk and the deposit duration is not only about the interest rate, it's also about the creditworthiness of the institution. What I didn't cover due to time constraints is this last point about the length of the simulation. I will just mention shortly here. The longer the tau in the simulation, so the longer the time of the simulation, the longer the duration in the low interest rate environment was, because as I said, depositors had only incentive to accumulate rather than to withdraw any funds. Therefore, in the low interest rate environment, the selection of the parameter, how long the simulation horizon is correlated or is partially defined by the risk appetite of the modeling, is a risk appetite input for the modeling institution. Thank you for the attention, and I'm happy to discuss further with you and the discussant in the Q&A session.
Thank you, Sebastian. I will now invite Petros Miyakis for the discussion. Petros is currently a financial economist at the Bank of Greece. He joined the bank in 2006 after completing his PhD in Athens University of Economics and Business. His research on sovereign risk, credit ratings, and monetary policy has been published in journals such as the Journal of Banking and Finance, Journal of Empirical Finance, and European Financial Management.
Thank you for having me here. It is a great opportunity to visit EBA. Of course, the usual disclaimer applies in my discussion. These are personal views. I have found the paper presented earlier to be a very topical, especially in the current interest rate changing environment. I will just very briefly wrap up the paper structure. The paper is structured, let's say, in 3 major sections. Of course, it has more sections in there, but let's say first it motivates the issue of how deposits change when interest rates change. Then it introduces the empirical setup. The empirical setup is distinguished to deposit rates and to deposit volumes. The authors, let's say, make deposit rates as a function of the risk-free rate, make the deposit rates as a function of the margin between the market rates and the deposit rates, and taking into account alternative strategies for short-term risk-free bonds. And then they introduce this equation to deposit volumes, where they very interestingly introduce also some kind of credit risk, which they intend to link to bank risks. After that, the last major section introduces simulations in order to produce policy relevant results on how the duration of sight deposits mainly, but also of deposits redeemable at notice will change based on given changes in interest rates and other factors. The main formula that Sebastian has just showed us is drawn from a seminal paper on the topic. What I gather from both the presentation and the paper I have read is that the innovation of this paper is that it introduces a credit risk factor in the deposit volumes, and this is very interesting. And I intend to motivate the authors to work more on that, and so I will focus my comments on that. So the explanatory variables of the deposit rates, as I said, are market rates and the lagged margin between deposits and market rates. This works as an error correction mechanism, so it has adjustment effects to deposit rates, and then they introduce them to the function of the deposit volumes. Data are very interesting. They are individual bank balance sheet items data and individual market interest rates data. So they have a quite large cross-section of 132 banks. The period spans from July 2007 to January 2023. And okay, the empirical results, what I will focus here is on the last bullet. The paper says that there is an increase of sovereign CDS spreads beyond 200 basis points, which they use as a threshold, explaining a decrease of deposit volumes by 5%. This cannot help bringing into my mind, what about bank runs? So when the sovereign faces problems, this is a very interesting mechanism to, let's say, draw conclusions about how bank runs are done. And so, okay, the simulations. So this comes to my first comment. They use sovereign CDS spreads in order to, as a proxy for bank risk. So I have, let's say, skepticism on this. Okay, CDS spreads are more, let's say, inclusive variable than bank risk. So sovereign CDS spreads we saw spiking mostly because of public debt problems. Of course, one can think that these public debt problems would be then contagious for banks. This is the sovereign bank, the bank sovereign loop. Of course, the literature on the bank sovereign loop has worked in both ways. So it decomposes bank-specific risks from country-wide risk or sovereign risks, right? So the first main suggestion I have is that the authors may try to orthogonalize what is truly bank risk, bank-specific risk, to what is an economy-wide risk that is beyond bank risks. So, okay, you mentioned, Sebastian, that it is a scarcity of data on bank CDSs that has kept you away from doing this. But yet again, you can use, let's say, beta coefficients from equity returns of banks in order to see the sensitivity of a given bank to risks that are wide enough to capture the whole market. So the first comment is the latter, the last bullet point here. I would suggest that you should orthogonalize the bank's specific CDS and not, let's say, allow yourselves to, let's say, have some kind of muted results that you get from the CDS spreads. Now, this brings me to the second comment, which is that I find the introduction of sovereign CDS spreads yes, an interesting idea, but the results are quite muted. A rise of CDS spreads beyond 200 basis points, and I will explain what these thresholds mean, reduces deposit volumes on a monthly basis by 1.7%. So we can imagine that as soon as a sovereign is downgraded from BBB minus to BB, this is what that 200 basis points of CDS spreads means in terms of probability of default. It is explained as 3.37% in probability of default. According to rating agencies, this is linked to a BB rating. So the dummy variable, the bivariate variable that they use, takes the value of 1 as soon as the CDS spreads hits the 200 basis points threshold. This, in rating terms, is interpreted as soon as the sovereign has been downgraded by the CDS market from BBB, which is a probability of default of 1.5, to BB, non-investment grade. Yet, this would be much more worrisome to depositors than to withdraw just 1.7% of their deposit volumes from banks. What we saw in Greece is that exactly at that time, when the sovereign was downgraded below the investment grade threshold, we saw massive monthly deposit outflows from Greek banks. So I think this 1.7% on a monthly basis is quite muted. So what is the workable form of my comment? Let's say in econometrics terms. As you say in table 7.3, CDS premia are near unit root processes, right? So you cannot exactly replicate them with binary variables taking 0 and 1 level. I would suggest that you have a more, let's say, structured variable that has an exponential form from, let's say, 0 probability of default at AAA and AA level to 0.5 at single A level, 1.3 at BBB, 3.4 at BB, 15% at single B, etc. This is available by rating agencies' transition and default studies for the banking sector, so you can replicate this kind of structure of the probability of default and insert them in your paper together with my previous comment on how you can orthogonalize the bank-specific risk to the economy-wide risk. Now, why should you do that? If you see on the chart on the right, your results, these are your results from table 7.6, imply that you have a twice as much larger duration for AAA countries than for non-investment countries, non-investment grade countries. I think that this result is directly linked to how you model sovereign CDS and why you take it to be a bank risk proxy. Now, if you, I guess I have not run the exercise, that if you decompose actual bank risks to sovereign risks, this picture will become clearer and you might have a much larger sensitivity to interest rate risks to more risky countries or more risky banks. I cannot wait to see the final version of the paper if you decide to introduce such kind of orthogonalization. This is, to my mind, a very interesting picture to elaborate on. Why do the AAA, let's say, countries have a larger interest rate sensitivity, not comparable to non-investment grade, but let's say to AA countries? Is it that this implies that AA countries are more credible guarantors than, let's say, AAA countries? Is it a financial integration effect? AAA countries and their depositors are much more financially literate, so they move their deposits faster than do AA depositors. Okay, you can explore this further. Overall, I have found the paper very topical and very interesting. It is in an advanced draft form, so I think that you have some room there for working it further. At present, its focus is on the interest rate effects on duration of deposits, but I really have found very interesting the idea that you intend to introduce credit risk, and I would like to motivate you to decompose economy-wide related credit risk to bank-specific credit risk instead of taking sovereign CDSs as proxy of bank risk in your paper. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Petro. Let me now open the floor for questions. Maybe Samuel, is there any question on the chat? Okay, then maybe I can. Oh, so there is one. Let's.
Yes, from the virtual audience. So from Tulen, have you also tried to take into account DGS coverage as mitigant to the credit risk and term deposits as an alternative investment strategy?
And
Thanks.
I also have a question. So my question is, what is the role of, if any, of competition in your model? So how do you see new players coming in, like fintechs, affecting the duration of bank deposits?
Okay, so first of all, let me thank the discussant for the valuable comments. Definitely, it's a good comment to for us to also focus more on the creditworthiness of the banks. Regarding some specific ideas, how we came to the 200 basis point level, we run the model for the deposit equation for various level of the dummy variable threshold, and we and based on the results, we decided to take the one that gave them the best that gave the best results. So this is how we went. We calibrate the model based on the past data. We will, of course, look deeper into the suggestions presented, and especially to this possible spread between the sovereign and the bank creditworthiness. For the questions from the chat about the deposit guarantee schemes, so the answer is no, we have not looked at this. Indeed, the retail deposits that we are looking at the site retail deposits, they are to a big extent covered by DGS, but at the same time, we saw in the data that there is an effect even with the deposit guarantee schemes, and partially the result might be that the deposit guarantee scheme, since we take the sovereign debt, the sovereign CDSs, those are strongly related to each other. We tested, however, the target 2, the question from the last question was about, could you remember the last question? I didn't write it down.
So it was about competition from new players.
From fintechs, yes. Yes. Yeah, this is a very relevant question. Thank you for the comment. It is indeed one of the issues that would be great to check, but no, our model has not looked into this yet, and the thing that might change with and that we might see the shift with the introduction of fintechs is what we call the opportunity cost coefficient, because the depositors would have other alternatives to invest, and would basically shift away from the bank deposit to some other forms of investment once once the difference between the market and the deposit interest rate gets bigger. So no, we have not looked at this, but in the longer term, the model would allow to check how this opportunity cost coefficient fluctuates over time with the probably more and more fintechs entering the scene. And then there is a question about the term deposit as alternative investment strategy. No, this is outside the model, or this partially in the model because the Jaro van de Venter model, which we use, assumes the difference between the market and the deposit interest rate. And the fixed term deposits in general should move closer to the market interest rate. So indirectly, we take this into account. It's basically this alternative investment strategy. Indeed, in the model, it all enters as a market interest rate, but there's definitely a correlation there. So indirectly, there is also this idea that depositors might invest basically something else than the sight deposits.
Thank you, Sebastian, for the great presentation and replies.